and welcome to Something to Talk About. I'm Linda McNamee, and as you saw from our introduction, we celebrated I think it's safe to say, a new holiday this past week called Juneteenth, and we're going to learn a little bit more about that and learn a little bit more about the background. But before we begin, I do want to invite you, if you have a question for my wonderful guest, whom you will meet momentarily, you can always give us a call at 781-270-9199. Or if you have a question for a future topic, or a suggestion for a future topic, or a question that you didn't think about answering, you could always email me at talk@bcattv.org. As always, I would like to thank the crew for this evening. John Vias is one of the staff members here at BCAT. He is covering for Chris Flaherty, who's feeling a little under the weather today, so hopefully, Chris, you feel better soon. We have some returning crew, which I'm very excited. Jolie Atwood and Liz Gillespie are back from their first year at college, and they decided to come give up their Wednesday night to hang out at BCAT, for which I am eternally grateful. And we also have Evan McNamee, who is also crewing this evening because he had to take over for Jolie and Liz, who went off to college. So thank you, Evan. And I would like to, last but definitely not least, thank my husband, Paul, for staying home for Daddy Date Night, even though half of the daddy role is here directing. So anyway, I think all businesses aside, I would like to introduce you to my wonderful guest, Sean Osborne, who is the founder and president, correct, of the Association of Black Citizens of Lexington.
As of January 1st, I stepped down as president, and I'm now historian.
Oh, okay. History is cool.
It is. That was the.
Okay.
That was my stepping out of the executive role, and now I get to be the guy who just hangs out in history.
Well, thank you very much for coming. Yeah. I was very excited when our mutual friend Martha Duffield, I reached out to her and I said, "Hey, I want to talk about Juneteenth and find out everything." She's like, I'm probably not the best person, but I know a guy. So she suggested that you come, and thankfully you were available, so here you are. So thank you.
You are most welcome. It was great to get the email from Martha saying, "Can you?" And I'm like,
Oh, if I have to. So thank you.
Yes.
Before we get into talking about Juneteenth and what led to the development of it being a national holiday, can you tell us a little bit about you, where you grew up, how you came to the Burlington/Lexington area, and what brought you down this path of historical significance?
Sure.
No pressure.
Only an hour. Okay. So
we could always have a sequel.
Well, I first, it's so nice to see the folks in Burlington reaching out to those of your neighbors in Lexington and saying hello. So it's good to be here at BCAT.
At BCAT.
So I grew up a military child.
Oh,
so,
okay. So you were like everywhere.
So I was everywhere. My father did serve 30 years active duty in the Army.
Wow.
So that meant that we were able to overlap. So my brother was an Army doctor. I was an Air Force engineer. So
cool.
The three of us were all active duty at the same time.
Wow.
So we have the picture of us all in uniform.
And your mother must have been losing her mind.
My mother was really happy when my father retired from the military from the moving standpoint.
Oh, okay.
But my father's idea of retirement was to take the weekend off. So he's been working ever since, so.
Exactly. My brother-in-law was career military, and now that he's retired,
right,
he's doing, more than what he was doing when he was active. So
I think now that he's, reaching into his, his golden years, he's, starting to, my father that is starting to take Sundays off. So that's his, big, So my goal.
So now it's not the whole weekend; it's just half the weekend.
Yeah. So my goal is to not do that. But we'll see what happens.
It's good to have goals.
It's good to have goals.
So.
My wife says, "Sure, Sean, sure." My father, in addition to being a Army officer, Signal Corps, loved history.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And he taught military history at Prairie View A&M, which is an historically black college in Texas.
Oh, okay.
When I was a wee one.
Okay.
both my parents are at least fourth generation Texans.
Okay.
And so as we traveled around the country and around the world, history was always there. And my mother was a teacher, so that combination.
So you didn't have a choice.
Yeah, I love it. I'm the person that you leave behind in the museum, because I'm reading everything, all the details, and looking at the. Right?
What happened to Sean?
Folks like to say I've gone through the exhibit, I've gone through the gift store, I've traveled around the museum, and where are you? Oh, I'm
Still in
you're
the
where?
first.
Yeah.
But it must be kind of interesting traveling because, you know, going back in ancient history, when I was in college, I took a course that looked at events in history from the perspective of those who won or who wrote, you know, the wars. You know, whoever won the war, they're the ones who write the story. So of course they're always the good guy. So it, you know, just different perspectives of at least U.S. history must have been interesting for you.
So I never knew that idea about whoever won because, you know, my father being a military officer in military history, I had access to the debriefs on the battles.
Okay.
What people did right, what people did wrong.
Okay.
So I was looking at history from that angle.
Okay.
Right, so.
Because, you know, my perspective was
right.
the history books, whoever wrote the history book, well, that must be what happened, so.
And so as a lover of history, I was the person who read beyond the
So you were
required
trying to
history books.
Be objective.
Well, also, if you read I found as a student way back when, that regardless of what's testable, the textbook is interesting.
Okay.
What's in the side margin?
Okay.
And so that was my approach to history. And so when we lived in Germany for 4 years, right, it was, you know, thinking about the long occupation post World War II that you know, that we were part of in West Germany, right, and preparing for nuclear Armageddon, and so that was my childhood, right, preparing for fun things.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, and then I was really lucky to have teachers who loved history. So my civics teacher, which was a requirement in Louisiana for 10th graders.
It was in Massachusetts for 10th graders, at least when I was a 10th grader.
And I've heard it's gone now.
Oh, really?
Yes, and so if you wonder why people don't understand history and citizenship.
Civics?
That's why, no
That's
civics,
why.
right?
Okay.
And so this guy was so much fun, retired Army officer, because we were you know, outside of an Army post.
Yeah.
And he's talking about how do you write a check, but the history of checks and the history of banking. Like, oh, that's so cool, right?
Yeah.
And that idea that because banks weren't national, that you would write something, and then someone would then, you know, call the bank and say, okay, so and so is in front of me. Like, oh, you, and so there's descriptions, all these. Like, so, and then I had this his teacher in Virginia for U.S. history, who always challenged us and our preconceptions.
Yeah.
And so back in the day, the Blues Brothers.
Oh yeah.
Were popular, and he walks out and he says, "Children, that's just a Sam and Dave ripoff." Like, who's Sam and Dave?
Yeah.
Right. But that was the way he got us to think beyond what was packaged in front
think
of us.
outside the box.
Right. And so I've been really fortunate to have both my parents
that was your
and
model.
then others to not necessarily question, but to understand. Right. There's more to the story and what's out there.
Okay. Cool.
So then through the Air Force, I ended up at Hanscom, and then after I left active duty, I'm here.
You just decided to stick around because this is an amazing place to live.
We'll go with that. I was so hoping to live out west, but I found the job.
Yeah, it would have been nice to be stationed in Hawaii.
I had a position in California, Southern
California.
California. I love that area to visit, and I wanted to actually see what it's like to live there.
But we have cool history around here.
The history here I've really fallen in love with. I will say that when I came to visit my father, who was stationed at Harvard as a senior fellow.
Okay.
Back when I was in college, that was one of his duty stations. I say that because it's not a military base; it's university, but whatever, right? It works.
He was assigned.
Exactly. He was assigned there, and I remember coming up here as a child who grew up in the Southeast.
Okay.
Lived in Germany, never lived north of Virginia.
Okay.
And thinking, we fought over this? Come on.
Seriously?
Is there nothing else? How bad was it in England?
Talk about your fixer-upper.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Lion King. Sorry.
Right. Yeah. So good. That's good. So, so then to come back after saying in college, I'll never live this far north. And then, right, exactly. I've been here for almost 30 years. So, oops, I was wrong.
Yeah.
But it's been great. So now I've coming to New England history with all of my Southern myths.
Oh, okay.
And then hearing all the Northern myths about the South, like, what? Like, oh,
See, exactly, perspective.
right.
I'm not making this up.
You were right
making
on
this
it.
up.
It took me a while to get to the fact of saying, you are so right, Linda.
All right, it's been recorded. I
Right.
was right once. Okay. Anything else to add?
So I got here and I did not realize just how fortunate I've been to be in historical places. So
Okay.
in my 3 towns I've lived in Massachusetts, that's
Okay.
Concord, Lexington, and Stowe, right? So everybody has their own militia, reenactors, right? It's like, you have to have some interest, right? And so I sort of, it was there.
Right.
It was in front of me.
You couldn't ignore it anymore.
Couldn't ignore it anymore, and just different pieces and coming together and tripping over my ramblings through history.
But I like your ramblings. Cool stories. It sounds better when you say really awesome stories as opposed to ramblings. But anyway,
Okay.
You are the historian and former president of the Association of Black Citizens of Lexington.
Yes.
What is that? Tell me more about that.
So.
And founder. So
Right.
how'd you
So
find it?
in 2017, I was having dinner having lunch with 2 guys, and we were talking about how hard it was to find other black people in Lexington. And so I asked the question, well, who do you know? And so as we went through the names of folks we know, I realized, I don't know your people. So perhaps they're more in town than we know. But we need a reason to come together.
Okay.
Right, because everybody has their silos. You have your work silo, you have your house of worship silo, you have your neighbor's silo, you have your kids' activity silos.
Oh, yeah.
Right, that's right. So you're onesies,
compartmentalized.
twosies, right? And so you're not seeing people, and so we had the idea that we needed the name. So the reason why it's Black Citizens is because black is all encompassing. We couldn't say African Americans because we have folks who've immigrated from Africa or from the Caribbean or from Europe or South America who are black and living in Lexington, right? So do you pick a variety of blackness or you just say black? So I said, okay, I just say black is all encompassing.
Okay.
And then citizens, because one of our goals is to have people engage the government as a full citizen, so that
okay.
you're not
Get
requesting,
more
you're
involved.
demanding.
Ah,
Because you're
ooh,
paying your taxes for a reason. It's have
I-
things that work for you.
like that.
Right. So that was the.
That's clever.
And so at the time, I was the chair of Lexington's Human Rights Committee.
Okay.
So, so that was sort of my perch at the time.
Okay.
And so we formed up, and we had people from the Concerned Black Citizens of Lexington of the 70s, some of those alumni of that organization.
Okay.
At the time was, it lasted, I don't know, 5 or 6 years in the 70s. They were still in town, and they joined in, and we talked about, why they formed and what they were doing. And and a lot of them who had been here, our elders who had moved to Lexington in the 60s and 70s, came to an early meeting saying, "Who are you? Who are you? No, you've been here how long? 20 years? I've never seen you." And so one of
Silos.
silos. And one of our goals was to create a stronger Black community. And so here we are 5 years later, and people are actually seeing each other and saying, "Have I seen you before? Oh, I haven't. Have you been to ABCL?" And so people are using that as an icebreaker to talk to someone who's either Black or has a Black child.
Okay.
Right, and then and that's the whole idea, right? It's in terms of the fellowship portion, and then in terms of the citizenship side.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
We went from having 3 members of town meeting to over 6. I think we're at 8 now. Black members of town meeting. So now we're.
How big's town meeting? Because like Burlington's town meeting is like 170 people, and 6 doesn't seem like much.
So we went from. So if you think of the fact that there are 1% of the population of Lexington is Black.
Okay.
3% of town meeting is now Black.
Oh.
And we now have an elected member of the planning board.
Excellent.
A Black woman, and who's also a Lexington High School alumnus. And we have a Black man who was elected recently to the school committee.
Excellent.
And so, again.
And this is all new within the past 5 years.
Yes.
So there may or may not be a correlation, but we're going to believe there is.
Oh yeah, that's a correlation.
Okay.
and also with our appointed committees, we went from 2 or 3 of us to now there's several of us who are volunteering, and that's the idea, because it's not about my vision or the vision of the executive committee. It's about getting the random Black people who live in town to be as outspoken about whatever their lovely ideas about making the world a better place, giving them a perch to do so. And that's why the C is important. And then the third part, of course, had to be about history. Because as before I had that lunch, I had been hearing all these different stories about Black people in Lexington. Again, from the Southern perspective, there were no Black people in the North. Right? So I'm like, oh, I was so wrong. And how wrong was I? Well, and you were here, and you were here, and there's this lovely woman, Leona Martin, who has done a lot of genealogical research on her family. Who likes to remind everyone that her ancestors were loyalists.
Oh.
And were from the Boston, Cambridge area.
Okay.
Right? So I'm like, oh, that long. Okay then, all right then.
All right, do you really want to admit that you were a loyal? No.
All the time. Yes, she does. She's all good. Somebody has to be loyal.
Okay.
Right. And so understanding how wrong I've been
Okay.
I'm like, okay, so why not just share what I found with others and then talk to others and learn from them
Right.
their histories and go, what?
You weren't wrong. You were just uninformed. And now that you are informed, you are taking on a new perspective.
And sharing it. And that's the goal
okay.
of the association, right? Is to, because one of the things that all of us have probably noticed is that the storyteller only sees the story through their lens,
Right.
the lens they've lived.
Okay.
And what that means is that they don't ask the right questions. And therefore, you can have a long conversation and never get to the, what?
Yeah.
And so
the aha moment.
I love being able to talk to people and hear their stories and then start making those connections and saying, oh,
filling in all the pieces.
so now you have a better narrative.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that if you or your family or the viewers want to go downtown Lexington now, one of the fruits of our work as an association, working with the Lexington Historical Society, is at the Lexington CVS in downtown.
Oh yeah.
There's 6-8 panels on the 4 known Black Revolutionary War soldiers from Lexington.
Cool.
And so it's, yeah.
Is that like really new? Because I was driving by maybe a few weeks ago and like the CVS was like under construction type.
Right, so it went, I believe, it went up in May, from like around Memorial Day.
Okay.
And it's going to come down July 4th weekend, or
Okay.
thereabouts. So
you better hurry up.
Yes, you better hurry up. And prior to that,
Okay.
from April to May, there were information on the indentured, enslaved, and free Black people of 18th century Lexington.
Oh, wild.
So and that's the, so it's not just, having these stories to share among ourselves, it's sharing it with
the bigger
everybody.
community,
Yeah.
and making that little bubble bigger.
Exactly.
So, okay, total tangent. These panels,
Yes.
what happens in 2 weeks? Because you said
so in
they're going to be
2 weeks,
taken
the
down.
panels will come down, and then the Lexington Historical Society, which, as we talked about, my ability to retire, I'm on the
Okay.
I'm on the board of the LHS as well.
Okay. In your copious spare time.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. We are updating our website, and so the spring exhibit and this exhibit will be available online.
Okay.
So that's the good news.
Okay.
You can see the panels online, so that'd be good.
I'm just wondering if, you're going to create, Burlington just a couple years ago created a sculpture park. Maybe you can have like a historical park with the big panels and everything.
There is so much rich history, there's not enough space for that to do.
Darn. Okay. The title of the show was Reflections of Juneteenth.
Right.
I know we only have like half an hour or more left, but what can you tell me about Juneteenth? I know, in a nutshell, you only have 30 minutes, so,
So,
because it's a national holiday, and it's celebrating something that happened 170?
June 19, 1865.
I can't do the math, I'm sorry.
Major General Granger wanders in the Galveston with 2,000 troops. He doesn't wander in the Galveston 2,000 troops to say, hey, Black people, a while back, some guy said that I have a sheet of paper that I can't enforce. No, he comes in as an occupying army.
Okay.
Because in the spring of 65,
Okay.
there were over 50,000 Confederate troops in Texas under the command of General Kirby of the
Okay.
Trans-Mississippi Army. Remember,
Okay.
this is the Confederacy.
Right.
In 61, they said the same thing that we said to the king. I love you, but I got to go.
Yeah. See ya.
So all the things that are said by this now foreign government mean nothing to the Confederate States.
Okay.
Right? In the same way, no one talks about whatever King
Right.
George said after we declared independence.
Right.
Right? And the only way what King George said during the Revolutionary War would matter was if his army won.
Right.
Since they didn't, no one cares in America. So, from 61 to 65, Texas has created its own government. They have scrapped and gotten rid of the
talk to the hand.
governor that was elected under the United States, because he said, I'm a unionist. Said, okay, that's great, we'll miss you. So he's gone.
Okay.
They have their own governor. They have their own constitution. That constitution says, if you, as an enslaver, want to free your enslaved, that's illegal. So no more manumission. And if you, as someone who's enslaved, choose to try to leave on your own, that is no longer something that will cause you great pain and discomfort,
Oh,
but it's
right.
now a capital offense.
Oh, okay.
Right? So that's, again, if you are leaving the Union, the United States, because you want to keep your black neighbors enslaved,
Right.
then you change your constitution to make sure that they remain enslaved, right? So it doesn't matter what Lincoln says.
Yeah. He's far away. We don't have,
He's a
the
foreign
internet
co-
is not
he's a-
real.
He's a foreign commander,
Yeah.
right? So what General Granger and his 2,000 troops say to the folks in Galveston, it appears to me that you've lost. And if there happens to be any larger questions on your side,
Okay.
we can work that out, because we're here for that. And to which I said, no, we're good. We hear you. There was a skirmish in Brownsville, for those of you who are historians, yes. But, like, really? No, yes, it was a skirmish. But that's the reason why he arrives, because
Okay.
Kirby doesn't surrender until earlier in the month of June. There's more details in
Okay.
that whole timeline. But the fact that
But that would
Lee-
take a whole mini
right.
series on PBS.
But the fact that, and if you want to do that, we can do that together, sure. When Lee surrenders in April
Okay.
of 65, he's surrendering the Army of Virginia. That's nice.
But that's Virginia. We're Texas.
And don't forget, Sherman is not stopping his burning through the Southeast because Lee surrendered. So obviously there's more to the story of what victory looks like,
Okay.
right? So Lee has a surrender. Then Sherman's like, please, are you done yet? Please stop. So Sherman then accepts the surrender of, what is it, the Carolinas, Georgia, and Florida,
Okay.
right? And then another general, as you start moving along the Gulf Coast, accepts the surrender of the armies east of the Mississippi.
Okay.
And now then you have Kirby's forces west of Mississippi, and there's sort of a two-parter, but in general, right? So that's why you have this. You have to
Okay.
have an occupying army come in, change who's in charge for
Okay.
the proclamation to mean anything.
To take yeah.
And
or to
that's,
take
well,
effect.
this one, the proclamation is best understood as war propaganda,
Okay.
right? Because I'm glad you said it, but what are you gonna do about it?
Yeah.
I'm gonna continue to prosecute
Make-
the war.
Yeah.
Okay. Isn't that 2 years long? We're great to know. And that's why, if you look at the history of the proclamation,
Okay.
it was a negotiating tool for Lincoln. He was trying to get the Confederacy to surrender instead of having to use those terms. Because Lincoln wanted to save the Union. We had we had a fight over two different conversations. Lincoln wants to save the Union. Davis wants to keep slavery.
Right.
Right? So wasn't that Lincoln
Kind of
started
like
off
an
as,
apples to oranges thing.
right? And it wasn't
almost.
Lincoln was saying, but I want. It's like, no, I'm good. Whatever.
We have to play nice.
All I want you to do is just stay in the room.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, we're done.
Yeah.
And so with the proclamation, it becomes, okay, fine. We'll meet you on your terms. We will end slavery. You will try to save slavery. We'll see you in 2 years. And so,
Huh?
because, well,
right.
he didn't know
Yeah,
right, how long it
okay.
would take. But that's the really what the proclamation does.
Okay.
Right? Is it makes it be a head-to-head conversation
Okay.
about pro and anti.
Okay.
And thus you have the 54th and 55th and the other black regiments,
Okay.
right? And so that's we're not gonna. It's on. We've changed the conversation, and as a lover of military history, that's the fun part, right? that's the fun part.
All right.
So now you get to Juneteenth.
Okay.
And you say, okay, but it's General Order number 3, which tells you there's more than one General Order, which means he came there
Yeah.
to do more than just say, Lincoln was right, we won. And so there are other things he's talking about, like, hey, Galveston, you're the port city. Yeah, all that cotton, other things that you grow, that's now going to come through us, so that the money now gets processed.
Oh,
Because remember what I said before about being the occupying force in Germany as a kid? Kirby and the Union Army were an occupying force
Okay.
in Texas.
Okay.
And so that's part of what's happening, is he's now stating these are the rules of the occupation.
Okay.
And one of the rules of occupation are the Confederate Constitution is no longer in
yeah.
effect. Right? So
And
that's
I'm sure a lot of people were not happy about that.
they were not, and there was pushback, as there is with all
Everything,
things. Right.
yeah.
So and so you have to have that occupying force
Okay.
there. But I love Juneteenth in that even though General Order 3 is really, and all the other general orders around it, are really weak in terms of what it does for the now formerly enslaved black people in Texas.
In Texas. Okay.
Wonderful things happen in Texas between 65 and 80. And one of those wonderful things that happens is that a formerly enslaved black man from Texas, whose white father, who was also his enslaver, had taken him and his brothers out of the state prior to the separation,
Okay.
and dropped them off in a boarding school, and they were educated. He fights for the Union, comes back to his home state, gets elected to office, and then passes legislation to create what is now Prairie View A&M, where my parents met.
That's cool.
Right, so that's you take that opening
Yeah.
and you run with it, and you realize, okay, I understand how little help, as in none, I'm going to get from the Union military, because that's what the order says.
Right.
Do not come to us. Go back to your enslaver and negotiate your wages. Can I have more than 0? That would be great.
Yeah, no.
But that's what the black folks had, and yet they thrived. My ancestors thrived, right? And so that's, to me, what Juneteenth is. It's Texas Emancipation Day.
Okay, this is probably really obvious, but I'm missing the point. If it was an occupied army that had to initiate all these changes, how were they able to pinpoint that it was one particular day?
the orders are because
change takes time. So how can you pinpoint?
The orders are delivered on that day.
Okay.
Those are the days that's the days delivered, right?
Okay.
In Galveston. Galveston was the major city at the time of Texas.
Okay.
So even though the capital somewhere else, that's why it's important. Yes.
Okay.
So that's why June 19. And one of the places where the order was publicized was a black church in Galveston, which still exists.
Now, have you been back to Texas since Juneteenth has been recognized as a national holiday? Would it be interesting to be in Texas? Do you think their perspective would be different than ours?
I don't, because the love of history and the perspective that we're having now, having talked to relatives and friends who were living in Texas, they're like, really? Even though a lot of my research comes from the Texas Historical Society.
Okay.
Again, not everybody likes to read the small print.
No.
I love
or the
small
margins.
print. Right, exactly. I love that. And the margins, right. So I don't think it's changed, but I'm hoping that it will. I'm hoping that as people like you, Linda, ask these questions, that we go back to.
I'm trying to, make my little corner of the world a better place.
And that's what's great. I mean, I really appreciate that you're asking these questions and having me on, because it's important that we start back at the how and the why, and then go back and say, oh, okay, we don't. To me, it's counter to.
Okay.
The goals of Juneteenth to say that the folks in Texas were ignorant.
Well, no, I'm not saying that.
No, but others have said that.
I'm
right?
just
That's
thinking, if my root, again, I was born and raised in Massachusetts, so I do not have that perspective. But if I were originally from Texas and had that long history of being, whatever generation Texan, it's still admitting that we lost. And we have to have a new perspective on things. And I'm just, my own Northeast brain is saying, if I were down in Texas, I'm not sure I would embrace this holiday.
Oh, but we didn't lose, we won. I'm good.
Okay.
my side won. I'm all set. But I do agree with your sentiment that part of the change that I'm hoping that we do as a country is that we do talk about Confederate surrender days, and we do talk about what that meant, because it wasn't easy.
No,
right? It wasn't easy.
It took 4 years. Well, more than that.
Right, 4 years. Right, good. Yeah, it took 4 years, but war is never easy.
Right.
People die, people get maimed, loved ones are lost, right? There's a lot of destruction. And in the same way that we celebrate Victory in Europe Day and Victory in Japan Day, celebrate all of those great victories. Uplift Sherman and Grant and all those lovely Union generals, and make sure that you know all the fine Confederate generals who surrendered, and when they surrendered, and what they surrendered, and why they surrendered. Because many of them thought that they were going to be hung because they committed treason. Right? And so
hadn't thought of that.
Right, so, but they had.
But
right?
they had, you're absolutely
And that's part
right.
of why Kirby had that gap between I surrender on the 2nd of June and Granger comes in the 19th, was to give all of the Confederate leadership of Texas time to leave and go to Mexico because they were afraid of being tried and executed.
Okay.
Right? So, right, but without that general understanding, you lose all of the beauty and nuance of Juneteenth.
Right.
and that you have now fear and anger on the side of the part of the former white enslavers. Right? Now there are white employers who are now wondering, what's my status? And then for a little more history on why they're angry, Lincoln paid for the emancipation of the enslaved black people in D.C.
In D.C., okay.
So one of the hopes,
Where's our money?
that's why, as you follow the path of Confederate surrenders, like one of my forebears is believed to have moved from Alabama to Texas during the Civil War because his enslaver saw the tide of the war and wanted to bring his most important property with him to Texas, in the hopes that when the war ended, that Lincoln would pay him for, right? So that's right. So all of this stuff is going on,
and then he feels cheated because he didn't get.
He feels cheated. He feels shame. I picked the wrong side. I picked the loser. Oh, I am a loser, right? But now you want to get paid? I guess I do. But they burned out all I had, and so you have, right, this.
Yeah, we're coming out of a war.
You have coming out of a war, but then you also. You have black people who really don't really care. They want to wander off. They want to have their own land. You know, my father's side, his father was born in the 1890s.
Okay.
My grandfather grew up on a cattle farm that his black farmer owned in Texas, in the Dallas area. So black people were owning land, right, soon after the Civil War. Right. So it's not like they had to live and hang out with white people. Like, no, we're good. No. And so it's understanding, right, that yes, in all relationships there's tension, but also understanding that no, we're good. We will go to our schools. My paternal grandmother, one of the schools she graduated from was the school that's in the Great Debaters, and also a historically black college in Texas, right? So there's that to me is what you celebrate when you celebrate Juneteenth.
Okay.
You celebrate all of those black institutions that formed in the midst of nothingness.
Right. Okay.
And then you also understand that there wasn't just nothingness. There was also what's about ABCL. There's the big C. That these black people who were formerly enslaved, former Union soldiers,
they went out and formed their own cities and towns and governments.
No, they got elected to the state house, and they worked with their peers, white and black, to pass legislation. Not only did the Union soldier I mentioned who passed legislation for Prairie View, he also worked to pass legislation to form a school for the blind.
Cool.
Right? So that's that they were active in the rebuilding of society, an equal society. That's what they did. And then those people from Texas, like me, left and wandered off to other states and said, hey, let's celebrate Juneteenth. And people heard more Juneteenth than Texas Emancipation Day, right? So they didn't pair it together.
Okay.
Juneteenth being conjunction of June 19. Right?
I knew that part.
But yes, okay.
Oh, okay. Well, I also happen to know that, or I perceive that one of your other favorite topics to talk about is Quock Walker Day.
You guessed correctly.
So tell me about that. Who is Quock Walker, and why is he important?
So,
and how does he tie into Juneteenth, or does he?
So Juneteenth is Omega. Quock Walker Day is Alpha.
Ooh, okay.
So, the last state in the Confederacy to have Emancipation Day was Texas.
Okay.
Other states along the Gulf
you
Virginia,
said kinda like
they have theirs from April to June.
Okay.
Right? So you can look up their history and say, oh, that's when they happened in Virginia. Was April 19th, I think it's around there, whenever Lee surrendered, right? In April. I think it's April 12th. And so you have those days, but in July of 1783, in the midst of the Revolutionary War,
Okay.
Massachusetts has passed its own constitution, just like Texas did, right? And except for this one actually withstood the test of time because we won. Details matter. And so 1780, a constitution is passed, and in 1781, Quock Walker, who is at that point, he's 28 years old, comes in history in the 50s when as a 9-month-old, he and his parents, Mingo and Dinah, are sold to a farmer who's in the Barry area in Worcester County, Mass.
Okay.
And at 28, Quock Walker says it's time for me to work and get paid, not just work.
Okay.
And so he leaves his enslaver, who is the widower of his late mistress, because the initial purchaser died.
Okay.
Then the mistress died, and now the widower is like, okay, I know that the others who are now dead said they'd emancipate you when you're 21 or 25. They're gone.
Yeah.
Whatever. Keep working. And so at 28, he walks to another farm.
Okay.
And starts working for pay.
Cool.
And Jennison, the enslaver, the widower, tells him to come back. He says no. Comes back later and brings muscle. And they assault Quock Walker.
Oh, okay.
Quock Walker is not just bold. Quock Walker is also politically and socially astute. The folks who are paying him are related to his dead enslavers. And they say to the person who's guarding him in the barn after he's been beaten and shackled, really? My parents said that he was free. Yeah. Why is it? And so the person who's guarding him at the barn releases him to them. And then afterwards, as a no longer working for free as property, he sues his former enslaver for assault. In 1781, a jury of all white men agrees.
Wow.
And awards Quock Walker 50 pounds. Real money. That was the same amount of money that was required for you to have tax-free in land, according to the 1780 Constitution, in order to vote.
Oh, okay.
Right. So there was a threshold of land owning that you had to have in order to vote in Massachusetts. And they awarded him that as his damages.
So he could vote.
And he used that money, interestingly, to buy land in Barry and live there in the center of Barry until he died, or near the center of Barry, until he died, and his widow inherited his property.
Cool.
So 1781, he wins. 1781, he wins again when it's challenged.
Yep.
And then in 1783, it goes to the state Supreme Court. And the state Supreme Court, which is now, we have Quock Walker Day, otherwise known as Massachusetts Emancipation Day. Because now the state Supreme Court, through Chief Justice Cushing, says, remember that Constitution in 1780? Forget the promises. The Constitution in 1780 says that chattel slavery is incompatible with our Constitution. So it's unconstitutional. The jury agrees, and Jennison then, according to Barry Lore, goes back and all of the enslaved black people that he has on his farm, he then sells, one of whom is Quock Walker's half-brother, who he sells in Connecticut, who then makes his way back to Barry later on. And so he understands, okay, game over, jig's up. I can't make money this way.
Okay.
And so it's, others who are either facing trial locally understand, so they start doing the same thing.
Okay.
Either selling their property or manuming their property, their people, right? The enslaved black folks. And so by 1790, census, there are no enslaved black people in Massachusetts.
Wow.
And so that's the beautiful part of the story, is that you have in 1783 three collections of white men said, I believe in justice and I believe in our Constitution.
Okay.
And Quock Walker won 3 times.
Wow. It just seems so progressive for, my understanding of that time frame.
And that's the beauty, is that we think of history in terms of progressing, as the professional historians to say, no, it's in cycles. And so if you think about our revered texts, whether it's Buddhist or Muslim or Hindu or Christian or Judaism, whatever, that's way back when, right? If those people got it right 200, 300, 500, 5,000 years ago, why do we keep saying that, oh, I can't believe they thought that back then? But we revere what folks thought back then. Whatever back then goes back. So, of course, there were these pockets of people who were like, that is outstanding. So we should celebrate that and understand it's possible for people who had grown up in a system where, yes, there were pockets of,
but we need to make those pockets
free
spread.
and indentured black people. But now everyone who's black around you is going to be free, and in Quock Walker's case, you're going to pay him so that he can continue to pay his taxes, marry, live. You're going to so Quock Walker is a farm hand. His brother Prince Walker is a farmer. So now his white neighbors are buying his produce, so that he's able to keep that farm, raise his children.
Sustainability thing.
Right. His children are going to the local school in the 1800s.
Yeah.
Pre-Lincoln being elected in Massachusetts. Right. What? Right. So, exactly. Right. So when we think about what it takes for us now to make the change to build an equitable society, it doesn't have to be a multiple generations journey.
It shouldn't be that hard either,
Right.
but apparently it is.
But it doesn't have to be. Those are choices we make.
Okay.
Right? Those 3 juries made those choices. Random white men in the 18th century, not the progressive class we look at. We're like, not being progressive, we're being just. We love our Constitution. We understand. The person who, one of Quock Walker's lawyers was one of the, delegates for the Constitutional Convention, right? He was in the room when it was written.
Wow.
A Hamilton reference, right? So,
nice job.
Thank you.
Love it.
And so that's why I love the story of Quock Walker. I'm happy that we are at this point where the state Senate has passed legislation, and we're hopeful that sometime this month, if not this month, sometime this summer, that the House will also pass legislation and that the governor will sign it and it will become law.
So when would Quock Walker Day be?
July 8th.
July 8th. Okay.
So Lexington, everybody's invited.
Cool.
Lexington will be hosting its second annual community celebration on July 8th. One of our speakers is a farmer from Vermont, and so because it's busy season, it's hay season, in order for him to participate, we're making it virtual, so having him drive down, right?
Okay.
So this year we're celebrating Black farmers. And so our theme is Black farmers continue to persist. Quock Walker was a Black farmer, Prince Walker was a Black farmer, and there are not enough Black farmers in New England and across the country, but they're still out there, and we're going to talk about that and how we can support them, and maybe our children, and we'll say, I want to be a farmer too. We'll see what happens.
Okay, I'm not sure I want to be a farmer.
As I said, on my father's side, there are ranchers, and on my mother's side, there are farmers. It's hard life, and I agree with you. No, I'm good.
No, I'm good.
I like being an engineer.
I'm good. Okay, so
them.
you are having this big celebration on July 8th.
Friday, July 8th in the evening will be the virtual celebration, and then Saturday, July 9th at Bowman Elementary School in Lexington, there will be the Quock Walker Day Hike for Freedom. Because remember what I said, he walked.
Yeah.
So we have
is that how he got his name? No, or is that
he
just
gave himself his name. Another great story that next time we'll talk about. And he gave himself his name before. And my theory is his father, who was injured when his enslaver Caldwell was killed in a thunderstorm. Caldwell was killed by the falling branch. His father's leg was broken. His father heals. And then walks away. And so it's between his father leaving and the Caldwell widow dying that Quock Walker becomes known by all around him as Quock Walker. He gives himself his name before he turns 21. Right, it's so cool.
That is really cool.
Yeah, great name, right?
Yeah.
And his siblings are like, oh, I like that name.
I like that name.
And they take it on as well. And his nephews have the name, and so there's a Quock Walker Lewis from the Lowell area who's has also did well and was an entrepreneur. And some of Quock Walker's grandnephews fought in the Civil War.
Wow.
One in the Navy, one in the Army. But these are the stories, right? Those tie-ins, and we can keep going about.
Everything's connected.
Yes.
So, anyway, would you believe we are out of time?
Shocking.
And I think I only asked you like 3 of my 20
I prepared so
questions.
much.
I know.
Yes,
Sequel.
Yes.
But anyway, thank you so much. I love your storytelling. It is like really captivating. You know, it's made me want to learn more about history. And trust me, that's huge. But anyway, thank you so much for joining me. And I loved your stories. I know I just said that, but I really do. And I also want to thank everyone at home for tuning in this evening. I hope you enjoyed our little history lesson as well. And I hope you have had a reflective Juneteenth. Looking forward to other holidays. Have a great holiday season. Have a wonderful summer. And I'll see you around town. Good night.